Welcome to Ripped from Reddit. I'm your host Daniel. What was the hardest piece of news you've had to tell someone? I worked as a pediatric psychology fellow while in graduate school, PhD clinical psychology. This invoked providing psychological services for all children in the hospital. One of my very first weeks I was shadowing a more experienced fellow, and we encountered a family whose child, 7-year-old, was hospitalized after she was in a car accident with her father. Her father died in the accident and no one in her family was comfortable directly explaining this to the child. They had used a lot of religious euphemisms about death. He's watching over you in heaven. He's with you in spirit. But this language is not concrete enough for a young child who doesn't really understand death. Sitting with this child, body brace, lacerations all over, very flat effect, and explaining to her what death was, that her father had died, and having to ask questions to make sure she understood, was one of the most traumatizing experiences of my graduate training. I can still vividly imagine her face while we were telling her, and the tears silently rolling down her face. I had to tell my boyfriend his best friend was the body found in the river after he had been missing for 2 days. This hits close to home. My boyfriend's little brother went missing for 2 days. They found his body in the lake behind his workplace, where he was reported missing. He was only 22. Had to call my girlfriend parents at 1 AM to tell them there was a bad accident, that their daughter was en route to her, and I thought she would be okay. She died on arrival. Worst day of my life. Dude, I can't imagine the pain you must have gone through. I hope you are kind to yourself. The kicker was, I was in that seat she was in, moments before. Overcome by the need to get out and drive my own vehicle, we were just loading into car to leave. I got out and offered her to come with me in my car. She chose to stay and slid over into my seat. The seat that hit the tree would have been me. Her brother was my best friend for 15 years before. What an unfortunate coincidence. No one knew what was coming. Be kind to yourself and cherish the memories you made with her leading up to the accident, friend. Had to call my brother, sisters, and mother when I found my father dead. After calling 911 and my wife. I just did this on Mother's Day this year when my mom died. I don't ever want to hear my sister wailing like that ever again. Telling someone's family that we are giving up on searching for their loved ones who are lost at sea. I've been a person that received that news, and I could only imagine how hard it must have been for the Coast Guard to decide that. They made an incredible effort in stormy weather. We didn't find out until later that my friends had been shot and thrown overboard. There was no chance for survival and nothing other than their boat was ever recovered. I always wanted to send a thank you letter to the Coast Guard, but 12 years later I still can't get past the first 2 lines. I joined search and rescue as a way to try and pay that back, but it proved to be more than I wanted to handle emotionally. So, thank you for trying so hard to find our loved ones. We didn't find out until later that my friends had been shot and thrown overboard. If you don't mind me asking, what's the story on that? Was it pirates/smugglers or something? My friend's husband owned a charter fishing company. The booker accepted 2 men without IDs believing a story that their girlfriends had their ids on an island the men were booking for. In reality, one was fleeing charges in another state and their intent was to steal the boat. After my friends were reported missing, the Coast Guard located the 2 passengers on the lifeboat associated with my friend's boat. They had money, weapons and a BS story about pirates killing everyone but them. There was enough evidence to convict the men, but one confessed to avoid the death penalty. There are crime shows that feature it, but so far none of the books or shows have been able to just tell the story without over dramatizing it, making it feel like they tarnish the memory. The show Dark Waters will do an episode this fall. They seemed respectful when I spoke to them. Let's hope they are. I won't be in the show because I declined to be named or on camera. Not really something I want to bear in such a way. To tell my mom her husband had been molesting me for multiple years and that I wasn't going back into her house. Telling my mom in detail what my dad had been doing to me since I was a child was the most painful thing I ever had to do. When I was 22 my parents asked me to come home and watch my grandma, who had dementia and needed a carriage driver, while they went to visit my brother who was living out of the country. 2 days in, my grandma died in her sleep. Not only did I have to deal with being the person who found my grandma dead by myself, but I then had to call all of my various family members, parents, aunts, brothers, to let them know what happened. Edit. I wanted to thank everyone for your kind words and condolences. It's been 10 years since my grandma died, so this is not something I'm grieving over anymore. I will say to the many people who have mentioned being in similar situations, talk to your family, a friend, or someone you trust about any and all feelings you have about an experience like this. For way too many years, yes, I blamed myself for my grandma's death and carried it around like a shameful secret. It wasn't until I felt brave enough to tell my mom how I felt that she provided the appropriate perspective and support I needed to finally move on and make peace with that life experience. Sorry it came down to you to bear the bad news. I hope you enjoyed each other's company in her final days. She definitely had no idea who I was, but I think she knew she was with someone who loved her, and honestly, that's the best I could hope for in that situation. Definitely telling my grandmother that her daughter, my mother, had just died. Nothing quite prepares you for telling someone about a death, especially when it's their child. I'm sorry for both your losses. It's every parent's worst nightmare that they outlive their children. So sorry for your loss. I had to tell my mom that my dad died 40 years later. I had to tell my kids I had cancer. I'm sorry, I should have said I beat it, at least for now. Wow, thank you for silver. So sweet. I had to tell my wife that our 8-year-old son had died in the night. He was on hospice, and it was expected, but that was still hard. Then I had to phone my older children and tell them. Thursday will mark 2 years. Professionally, I had to tell the parents of a 20-year-old basketball star that his drug use did not account for his unusual thoughts and behaviors, that he was, in fact, psychotic and likely schizophrenic. I can't even fathom such a thing. I choke up when the invasive thoughts come in of what kinds of awful things could happen to my own son, and it terrifies me. I commend any parent that still finds a way to keep going after losing a child. I hope you've been able to see some brighter days after all that darkness. I have a wife and 3 other children who still seem to benefit from my continued existence. I have meaningful work and good friends. There is a huge hole in my life, but this is enough to keep me going. My brother, who was active military at the time, had to be granted emergency leave for my mother, who was on her deathbed after a short but destructive battle with cancer. They took more than 24 hours to sign one name on that document to release him, even knowing the circumstances. When he became noticeably upset that they were taking their time with it, they pulled him aside and threatened to make him undergo a psych evaluation for being, understandably, angry. She died while he was on his flight home. I had to tell him over the phone that he missed the passing of our mom and he wouldn't ever be able to say goodbye. That was rough. When my grandmother passed, we knew it was coming as she had been ill for a very long time. I was at home with my mom when my aunt called with the news that she was gone. My younger sister was at school, so we went to pick her up. When she was called to the office and she saw us there, I think a part of her knew why we came to pick her up, but that didn't make it easier to tell her. One Sunday at church, I was walking my baby outside when one of my best friend's mom came up to me. She was in hunting attire and looked to be in complete shock. She told me her husband, my friend's dad, had just fallen out of his tree stand and broken his neck and died, and she asked me to go get her daughter out of church to let her know. It was one of the worst days in my life. After my wife woke up from a medically induced coma, I had to tell her our son died. The look of soul-shattering pain still bothers me. I just can't. That must have been the lowest moment imaginable. I hope you find some joy and happiness now and in the future. Trying to explain to my 4-year-old niece why my longtime girlfriend wasn't with me anymore. She just didn't understand and kept asking questions like, I thought auntie loved you. Why did she leave? The breakup was recent and that conversation hurt, man. When me and my last ex broke up, I had heard that her little brother was pretty upset because I was the closest thing he had to an older brother. I felt pretty shitty for a little bit after that. Edit. Since so many people keep commenting about it, the little bro lives on the other side of the country now, and his mother wasn't exactly fond of me. I was a pretty shitty boyfriend to her daughter, so I can't exactly keep in contact with him.